The morning after my grandmother's funeral, I opened my banking app the way I always do, out of habit, not worry. I had $147,000 sitting in my personal savings account, money I had spent 4 years building, dollar by dollar, after my divorce. Money I had protected the way you protect something you nearly lost. Everything to earn. The balance on my screen said, $214. I read it 3 times. I set my phone face down on the hotel nightstand. I picked it up again. Still, $214. There was a transaction history I couldn't bring myself to scroll through yet, so I just sat there on the edge of the bed in my grandmother's town of Barrie, Ontario, in a black dress I hadn't changed out of. And I thought about how my brother Marcus had hugged me at the reception the night before, long and tight, the way he used to when we were kids, the way that always made me feel, even at 31, like maybe our family wasn't as broken as I knew it was. I scrolled. 6 withdrawals over 3 days, each one just under the $10,000 reporting threshold. Each one timed while I was driving the 11 hours from Vancouver, while I was sitting in a church pew, while I was holding my mother's hand at the graveside. The last one had cleared at 11:47 p.m. the previous night, while I was eating cold lasagna in my aunt's kitchen and watching Marcus pour himself a 3rd glass of wine and toast to Grandma Helen's memory. I found him at the breakfast table the next morning. He was eating scrambled eggs and scrolling his phone. He looked up and smiled. I put my phone on the table in front of him, the transaction history facing up. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he picked up his fork and took another bite of eggs. "Grandma wanted the family to be taken care of," he said. "You know she did." I pulled the chair out slowly and sat down across from him. My hands were steady. I had learned a long time ago, in a marriage that taught me more about emotional survival than I ever wanted to know, that the moment you show panic is the moment you lose. "She left a will, Marcus." "Wills get contested," he said. "That takes years. You have money. You've always had money. You've always had money. You have that job. The condo, all of it. I have 3 kids and a variable rate mortgage in this market." He gestured vaguely at the window, at the Ontario winter outside, as if the housing market itself was justification. "We needed it more than you did." I looked at him for a moment. My brother, 44 years old, same green eyes as our grandmother, eating scrambled eggs after stealing $146,786 from his sister while she buried the woman who raised them both. I picked up my phone. I pushed my chair back. "Then you won't have any problem with what happens next," I said. He laughed, actually laughed. "What's that supposed to mean?" I walked out of the dining room. Behind me, I heard him call after me, still half laughing, the confidence of someone who has spent his whole life assuming that consequences are for other people. What Marcus did not know, what I had not told anyone in my family yet, was that I had been a fraud investigator for a federally regulated credit union in British Columbia for the past 6 years. I had spent those 6 years learning exactly how money moves, how it hides, and how it gets found. I had also spent them learning what happens when a financial institution files a suspicious transaction report with FineTrack, Canada's financial intelligence unit, versus what happens when an individual files a civil claim. The two are not mutually exclusive. I knew that better than almost anyone. What Marcus also did not know was that 3 weeks before the funeral, my grandmother had called me. She was 81, sharp as she had ever been, and she had been talking to her estate lawyer in Barrie about revising her will. She was worried. She had told me she was worried about Marcus specifically, about the loan he had asked her for, that she had quietly declined, about the way he had started asking questions about her property on Kempenfelt Bay and what it might be worth. She did not want to cause family conflict. She just wanted me to know. I had listened. I had not told Marcus she called, and before I drove out for the funeral, I had a conversation with my own lawyer in Vancouver, a woman named Patricia who had helped me through my divorce and who I trusted completely. We had talked through several scenarios, not because I was certain anything would happen, just because I believe in being prepared. I was very prepared. I spent the rest of that morning in my hotel room on the phone, first with Patricia, then with the non-emergency line for the Barrie Police Service, then with my credit union's fraud department back in BC, not as a client, but as a colleague calling in a professional capacity to understand the cross-provincial recovery process on a transaction series like this one. Then with FinTrack's reporting line, because 6 withdrawals structured to stay under $10,000, a practice called structuring, is itself a federal offense under the Proceeds of Crime, Money Laundering, and Terrorist Financing Act, entirely separate from the theft itself. By noon, I had a file number from Barrie Police. By 2 o'clock, I had spoken to my grandmother's estate lawyer, a quiet man named Donald who had been practicing in Barrie for 30 years and who did not seem remotely surprised when I told him what had happened. "Your brother contacted me last week," Donald said. "He asked whether power of attorney documentation could be backdated under certain circumstances." A pause. I told him it could not. I sat with that for a second. Then I asked Donald what the estate timeline looked like and whether Marcus had any legal claim to expedited disbursement. He did not. My grandmother's estate included the Kempenfelt Bay property, her savings, and the contents of her home. It was to be split equally between her 3 grandchildren, myself, Marcus, and our younger cousin Diane. The estate had not yet entered probate. Nothing had been dispersed. What Marcus had taken was not an advance on inheritance. It was theft from a living account belonging to me. I want to be clear about something, because I think it matters. I did not do any of what came next out of anger. I had been angry once, for about 20 minutes, sitting on the edge of that hotel bed staring at $14. By the time I walked into the breakfast room and sat across from my brother, the anger was already somewhere else. What I felt instead was something I can only describe as clarity. A kind of cold, clean certainty about exactly what needed to happen and in what order. If you have ever had a season of your life that taught you to function under extreme stress, a difficult marriage, a sudden loss, a job that required you to think precisely when everything around you was chaos, you may know the feeling. It is not comfortable, but it is useful. The estate lawyer called Marcus that afternoon to inform him that the probate process had been initiated and that any funds moved from beneficiary accounts in the period surrounding the deceased's passing would be subject to scrutiny as part of the estate review. He did not mention my name. He did not mention police. He simply made a phone call, the way estate lawyers do, calm and procedural. I had asked him to. I found out later from my aunt that Marcus spent that evening on the phone with his wife Dana, that he told her it was a misunderstanding, that there had been a family agreement about the money, that he was going to sort it out. There was no family agreement. There had never been any conversation. He had simply watched me hand over my phone password to our mother 2 years earlier when she needed help with her phone, filed that information away, and waited for an opportunity. He had my banking login from a shared password manager account that I had added him to 5 years ago when we briefly considered going in together on a rental property and then never removed him from. I had forgotten it existed. He had not. That detail, the password manager, was what I kept thinking about in the days after. Not because it made me feel foolish, though I understand why people might see it that way, but because it told me something about the timeline, about how long this had been sitting in the back of his mind. You don't remember a detail like that by accident 5 years later. You remember it because you've been thinking about it, planning around it, waiting. The Barrie Police Service assigned a detective to the case within 48 hours. His name was Constable Ferraro, and he was younger than I expected and thorough in a way that I appreciated. He interviewed me at the station. He took the transaction records. He noted the structuring pattern, 6 transactions, 5 days, each one $9,400 to $9,600, and confirmed that this would be flagged separately for FinTrack review, regardless of the outcome of the criminal investigation. Constable Ferraro interviewed Marcus 2 days later. I was not present. I only know what came out later, that Marcus had initially denied touching my account, then claimed I had given him access, then claimed the money was a loan we had discussed, then went quiet and asked for a lawyer. By the time I drove back to Vancouver, there was a formal criminal investigation underway. The charge being considered was theft over $5,000 under the Criminal Code of Canada, which carries a maximum of 10 years. The structured behavior added a potential separate layer under federal financial legislation. My civil claim, filed to Patricia's office, was separate from all of this and running in parallel. I want to tell you about the week I got back to Vancouver, because it was the strangest week of my life in a way that had nothing to do with the investigation. I went back to my apartment, which is a 1-bedroom on the east side of the city with a view of the mountains on clear days, and I went back to work, and I sat at my desk doing fraud analysis the same way I had for 6 years, except now I was also a subject in a fraud file. I kept waiting to feel something dramatic, some moment of breakdown or release. It did not come. What came instead was a phone call from my mother. She had been quiet since the funeral. She lived in Barrie and had known Marcus longer than she had known me, which sounds like a strange thing to say about your own mother, but anyone who grew up as the responsible one, will understand exactly what I mean. Marcus was the oldest. He had always been the one she worried about, the one she made allowances for, the one whose edges she smoothed over. I had long ago stopped needing her to do that for me, which I think she experienced as me being fine rather than as me being independent. The two can look the same from the outside. She called to tell me that Marcus was very stressed, that Dana was very stressed, that the kids were confused, that she hoped I would consider what a criminal proceeding would do to the family, that Grandma Helen would not have wanted this. I let her finish. Then I said, "Mom, he took $147,000. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a moment of desperation. He watched me bury Grandma and he was moving money the whole time. I need you to understand what that means." She was quiet for a long time. "I know," she finally said, very quietly. "I know he did." That was not what I expected her to say. I had expected deflection. I had expected her to ask me to see his side. Instead, she said she knew. And for a moment I heard something in her voice that I had not heard in a long time. Something exhausted and sad and honest. "He borrowed money from your grandmother twice before," she said. "She didn't tell you because she didn't want you to worry. He never paid it back." I did not say anything. "I'm sorry," she said. "I should have told you. I do not want to make this a story about my mother, because it is not. But that phone call mattered to me in ways that are harder to quantify than a bank balance or a criminal charge. There are families where one person carries the weight of everyone else's silence for years, and the weight becomes so normal that nobody notices it anymore, not even the person carrying it. My mother had been carrying that weight for a very long time. I did not know how to help her put it down. I am still figuring that out. The civil claim was settled 7 months later. Marcus did not have $147,000 in cash. He had already spent most of it on a truck he'd been wanting, on Dana's credit card debt, on a trip they took the kids on in March that he posted about on Facebook, with the caption, "Making Memories." He had equity in his house in Barrie. The settlement required him to take out a home equity line of credit to repay me in full, plus interest, calculated at the Bank of Canada rate, plus 2%, plus my legal fees. Patricia was very good at her job. The criminal case took longer. The Crown prosecutor took it seriously, which I had hoped for but had not been certain of. Marcus ultimately pled guilty to theft over $5,000. He received a conditional sentence of 18 months to be served in the community, 2 years of probation, and a criminal record that will follow him for the rest of his professional life. The structuring behavior was referred to friend track, and I do not know the full outcome of that process, but I know there were additional consequences separate from the criminal sentencing. He did not go to prison. I know that some people, if they are watching this, will feel that he should have. I understand that feeling. I will not pretend the sentence felt proportionate to me in any emotional sense. 18 months community service and a record for stealing $147,000 from your sister at your grandmother's funeral is not the same as 18 months inside. But it is not nothing either. He can no longer work in finance. He can no longer coach the recreational hockey league team he had run for 6 years in his neighborhood because it required a vulnerable sector check that he now cannot pass. The community he built his identity around knows what he did. Some of those consequences are quieter than a prison sentence, but they are also permanent in ways that a sentence is not. Dana left him 8 months after the sentencing. I did not know her well, and I feel no satisfaction in that. Their kids are teenagers. I hope they are all right. My cousin Diane called me after the criminal sentencing. She is 3 years younger than me and lives in Halifax and had watched all of this from a careful distance. We had not been close growing up, not because of any conflict, just geography and the way family connections can thin out over years and provinces. She called to say she was glad it was over. We talked for 2 hours. She told me she had always found Marcus frightening in a way she had never been able to name. We talked about Grandma Helen. We talked about Diane's kids and my work and what it might look like to actually know each other as adults, rather than as relatives who saw each other at Christmas. We have talked every 2 weeks since then. I want to end with something I have been thinking about since all of this happened, because I do not want to tell this story in a way that makes it sound simple. The hard part of being betrayed by a family member is not the anger. Anger is clean, and it moves through you. The hard part is the archaeology, going back through years of memory and finding all the places where you saw something and explained it away. The loan he asked me for in 2019 that I gave him, without much thought, the way he had always known more about my finances than I had consciously told him. The times I had felt uneasy around him and decided the feeling was my own anxiety rather than information. That archaeology is slow and uncomfortable, and it does not have a clean ending. What I know now that I did not know 2 years ago was this: protection is not paranoia. Knowing your own finances, keeping your accounts clean, removing people from shared access when the reason for that access no longer exists, these are not acts of distrust. They are acts of self-respect. Nobody gets to take from you what you built in the hard years, not a stranger, and not someone who shares your grandmother's eyes. I am 33 now. I still work in fraud investigation. I got a promotion last year that I worked very hard for. My apartment still has the mountain view on clear days. My cousin Diane is coming to visit me in Vancouver in the spring, and we're going to drive up to Whistler and eat somewhere expensive and talk about everything we missed in the years when we were only relatives and not yet friends. My grandmother left me her pearl earrings in the will, separate from the estate distribution. Small, simple, the kind she wore to church. Donald, the estate lawyer, mailed them to me in a little padded envelope. I wear them sometimes on the days when I need to feel like I am carrying something sturdy with me. She knew what she was doing when she called me 3 weeks before she died. She always knew more than she let on, which is a thing I have always loved about her, and a thing I try to remember when I am tempted to think that nothing in my family was ever straightforward or real. Some of it was real. The earrings are real. Diane calling every 2 weeks is real. You get to decide what you keep. Remember that. There is something I have come to understand about the way consequences work, not as punishment handed down from somewhere above, but as the natural result of choices that compound over time, the way interest does, quietly and without pause, until one day the balance comes due. Marcus did not make one bad decision at our grandmother's funeral. He made dozens of small decisions over many years. To borrow and not repay, to watch and file away, to wait for the right moment, to believe that the people who loved him would always absorb the cost of who he was. Each of those decisions made the next one easier. That is how it always works. Not a single dramatic fall, but a long, gradual drift away from the person you could have been, so slow that you stop noticing the distance. What I want to say to anyone watching this who has been in a similar position, who has sat in a hotel room staring at a number that should not exist, who has looked across a breakfast table at someone they grew up with and felt the floor shift, is this: the clarity you find in that moment is not coldness. It is not the absence of love. It is what love looks like when it finally stops carrying someone else's weight. I spent years being the one who was fine, the one who did not need checking on, the one who would figure it out. And there is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes with that role that nobody names, because from the outside it just looks like competence. What I know now is that being capable is not the same as being invulnerable and protecting what you have built. Your savings, your time, your trust is not a failure of generosity. It is the most basic form of self-respect. The intelligence it took to build a life worth protecting did not fail me. It was there when I needed it. The discipline I had developed through hard years, a marriage that ended, a career built from the bottom, a savings account grown one responsible decision at a time. That discipline was not just financial. It was a practice of paying attention, of not looking away from uncomfortable information, of acting on what I knew instead of on what I wished were true. I wish I had acted on it sooner. I wish I had removed Marcus from that shared account years ago, not because I suspected him, but because access without purpose is just risk with a familiar face. I say that without self-criticism because regret is only useful when it teaches you something you carry forward. What I carry forward is simpler than I expected. Know where your access points are. Close the ones that no longer serve a purpose. Not out of suspicion, out of clarity. The earrings my grandmother left me are sitting on my dresser right now. Small and plain and exactly right. She earned everything she had through decades of quiet, consistent choices. She did not leave me money. She left me an example. That turns out to be worth considerably more. You do not need to be angry to protect yourself. You do not need to be cruel to hold someone accountable. You only need to be honest about what is happening, and then do the next right thing, and then the one after that. That is the whole of it, really. That is always the whole of it.